Welcome to the European Parliament. Delighted to have you here. I think the event, there's no health without brain health. I know there was a little bit of a play on this last night when we went for a bit of food last night, but no, I'm delighted to be here, delighted that you're here. I think it's very important, it's a very important issue that needs to be, if you like, highlighted more and addressed more. From my own perspective, I was talking to a few of us met last night. I was pointing out from my own perspective, this is something personal, because I have a brother who has had a brain tumour for the last 20 years. So, and my mother actually passed away in 2012 with a brain tumour. And then I have my partner's brother has Down syndrome. So they're all, if you like, brain injuries or acquired brain conditions, if you like. And I suppose from our family's perspective, this is all very relevant. And if you look at the statistics across Europe, in terms of 60% of the population have some level of a neurological condition at some stage during their life. So, according to the statistics, so this clearly is something that matters to an awful lot of people. If you look at the cost to the health service, it's estimated it costs 800 billion a year. In terms, and to put it in comparison, it's the equivalent of cardiovascular, cancer, and diabetes all put together. So that, just to put it in that context, what we're dealing with is an enormous issue. And in the last couple of weeks, a couple of things have been happening at home from my perspective. I was holding if you like, town hall type meetings with older people, and we're talking about the issues that matter to older people. We had 120 2 weeks ago in the neighbouring county, as we call it, and last week in my own we had about 150. And we got into a long 2-hour conversation about the things that mattered. And the real concern for people was to be able to live independently in their older age, and how the like of dementia or Alzheimer's, or how people can live in their own environment and maintain their independence in their own environment. So research into the likes of Alzheimer's, the likes of dementia, and indeed many other conditions is critical for the future of our health across Europe. When you consider we've an ageing demographic, and we've a life expectancy is going to grow. So these type of conditions are set to be more relevant into the future than they are today. So for me, all of this is very important. And I think there's a lot of learnings at European level from, okay, the pandemic was something different, but there was a lot of learnings at European level where when Europe came together and focused on research and then focused on coordinating its effort, how it could deliver during the COVID pandemic. And one wonders if we put the same focus particularly in terms of research, coordinating research and indeed investing in research, could we make a real and meaningful difference in terms of the future of this very serious issue, as we've pointed out. I think it comes at a couple of levels for me. There's obviously the acquired brain injury type scenario, or there's also people caring for their own mental health, which is a key area as well. And I think all of us, at some level, it's the research into the conditions, but it's also, if you like, health awareness, where we need to encourage everybody to care for their own mental health and to live or live that journey of minding their mental health. People assume it's a situation for somebody with a condition, but we all have a condition. We all have our own mental health to look after, and I think that's something we need to. So, at a number of levels, certainly the research level, the investment in research, the investment in a coordination of that research across the various European countries, I think is critical. But from my perspective, where we're at the moment in terms of coming to the end of this mandate and looking into a new mandate, I think during the last mandate, for instance, there was the whole beating cancer strategy, which was, if you like, a big focus of the mandate just gone. And if you consider when you put cancer alongside cardiovascular and diabetes, putting them all together is the equivalent of this. And in many ways, this is if you like, it's a younger science. There's much more research to be done in let's say, brain injuries. And I think we have to make sure that we invest appropriately. So from my perspective, I think we need to look at how we can institutionalise, if you like, an effort in this area during the next mandate, whether it be a working group, whether it be an initiative like the Beating Cancer Initiative was, or whether it be in some way potentially having a health committee, and this a key plank of the strategy around the health committee. So in one of those areas, I think we have to look. Certainly, I think we need a strategy similar to the Beating Cancer strategy. And I think it has to encompass at two levels. One would be around the area of the research and developing and coordinating research, but equally about bringing everyone on a respect and a recognition of the mental health journey we all go on. And I'm sorry, I think the lady down here can't hear me too well. But I think it's quite important that we do that. And I'm delighted to be here today. As I say, it's personal for me. I have a brother, I'd hoped he'd be here today, but he wasn't really fit to travel. But and certainly any support I can give in the coming months in terms of putting this on the agenda and promoting this as a key issue, I'm delighted to do it. So you're all very welcome, and I'll hand the floor over. Thank you.
Dear honourable members of the European Parliament, dear MEP Colm Markey, dear colleagues and friends, dear guests, it's a very great honour for me as the President of the European Brain Council to open this meeting. I'd first like to thank our host of the day for allowing us to be here, to come to the Parliament and discuss the need and importance of having brain science, brain research, brain health and brain innovation recognised on the EU political agenda. And thank you deeply for your support and your opening words. Today, in the context of the Brain Awareness Week, we're launching our campaign. You've heard it, No Health Without Brain Health. That will serve this engagement in view of the forthcoming EU elections, but also after this, when a new Parliament and a new Commission will take office. I'll say a few words about the European Brain Council. We're an advocacy organisation active at the EU level. We've existed for over 20 years, and we take pride in bringing together patient organisations, clinical and scientific societies, as well as the private sector, to generate consensus and speak with one voice to promote brain research at the EU level. The European Brain Council has managed tremendous achievements through its relatively short history, not least in presenting the evidence on the cost and burden of brain disorders in Europe. It costs something like 800 billion euros per year, and at least 1 in 3 Europeans are living with a brain condition. We're also busy with activities ensuring a surge in EU funding for brain research, which was last estimated to be in the region of 550 million euros per year, and that corresponds to a 40-fold increase in less than 15 years. So naturally more needs to be done, and we need to work harder in order to make sure that this effort remains commensurate to the burden that brain disorders pose on society. We don't only need to do more, but we need to do it better. We're looking forward to the forthcoming Brain Health Partnership with Horizon Europe as a catalyst in this regard. We're going to be hearing a little bit more about from the Commission's representative today, Catherine Behrens. This work of EBC builds into the current developments at national and international levels with the adoption of the Global Action Plan on Neurological Disorders and the adoption of national brain plans. Importantly, within its manifesto, EBC is calling for the following. Firstly, a European Parliament's intergroup on brain health and brain research, And secondly, an EU action plan or joint action on brain health and brain disorders. So today's discussion aims to elevate key issues from our constituency and community. We have a great lineup of speakers. We're really looking forward to hearing different perspectives, and we hope you enjoy the meeting. So to our agenda, the first item on the agenda, we had hoped to have a video from the World Health Organization to show you today. Unfortunately, we don't have it in time, but we're going to socialize it afterward on EBC's media platforms. So it'll be there afterwards. And then we will turn to our first session, testimonies of lived experience and policy, asks for the patient community. We have two speakers. We have Astrid Arneson, who's president of the European Federation of Neurological Associations, and Peter Kerry, who is the president of Gamian Europe. So, Astrid.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation and for hosting this meeting. So 10 years ago, I got a heart attack. As soon as I reached the emergency unit and explained my symptoms, the treatment started. I never got time to get scared because I was surrounded by people who knew what to do. And I was out there after a few days. Now I'm still followed up on medication to avoid new attacks. More or less exactly 1 year ago, a very good friend of mine, Dina de Souza, got the message, you have breast cancer. This was found out from a routine mammogram scanning and thus was detected in an early stage. She was devastated. But just a couple of weeks later, her treatment regimen was set up and followed step by step. It did cost her blood, sweat, and tears, but today she's recovering well, very well, and hopefully she's cured. Now, Dina is also suffering from Huntington's disease, the same disease that my mother had, my brother died from, and my sister is in the late stage. It's a neurodegenerative disease, it's lethal, it has a wide array of symptoms, cognitive decline, psychiatric symptoms, motor symptoms, sleep disorders, you name it, we got it. But there is no treatment plan in place. Why is that? To me, it doesn't make sense. We need to do better, we can do better. The sheer numbers, as mentioned by our MEP here, speaks for itself. We need to have this up on the priority list, and it should be, in my opinion, on top. An EFNA survey from 2022 showed that only 20% of people suffering from a neurological condition has access to affordable therapeutics that treat their treatment satisfactorily. And being a chronic and lifelong condition, which many of these neurological conditions are, families and patients need to cope and learn how to live and use the best of their capacity. And trust me, there is little support out there to find. And an enormous amount of human capabilities are lost because this lack of support and services helping us to cope isn't there. It's still. So our first policy ask is, we need to have brain health really on top, as you mentioned here in the opening statement. And we need to work smarter with the resources we have, because we realize there is limited resources, but we can do better than we do today. And one of the major things we should do is to build down silos on all different levels. Yesterday, or a few days ago, I was in touch with many of the patient organizations throughout Europe, and we discussed the barriers, the boundaries we face. In Spain, for instance, each region is autonomous and set up their healthcare services and systems. And it really doesn't make sense. Huntington's disease is a rare disease, and you have these silos not working together, it's such a huge waste of resources, and we lack expertise. So why don't we work more collaboratively at all levels to enable the services to reach to patients when they need it, where they are? We can do better with the resources already there. And we should really make all politicians at all levels, or all decision makers, understand the need for collaboration. So another thing I would like to say is that please stop overprotect us. As patient organizations and representatives, a lot of the interpretation of the data protection rules, for instance, creates huge hurdles for research to happen. Patients dedicate time and effort to provide information, to provide the data. We want it to be used. For instance, in Scandinavia, ethics committees spent years to have a fun discussion between themselves if a project being requested by clinics was a register or an observational study. Now, it's both. It's called Enroll HD. And because of this back and forth with the clinicians asking for permission to start this study, they delayed for Denmark, the Danish patient population, with at least 3 years. In Norway, my country, where I come from, it delayed it with 7 years. Can you imagine? 7 years to discuss, to fit the formalities. Sweden never got in. And this is despite the fact that all the patient groups, all the researchers and clinicians really were convinced that this was a sound and good project. Sorry. Oh, is it difficult to hear me? So we need to build down these barriers. We need to have data accessible for research, and this is a huge building block in having research happening as efficiently as possible. And we need more research, as was mentioned here. That's really important. And we really welcome the Brain Health Partnership coming into place from 2025. And we need to make sure that research is, of course, about finding treatments, understanding how the brain functions. It's a young science, as mentioned here, but we definitely also need research on what is working with the therapies and the interventions we are already using. We don't know. People are in the health services are doing their best based on their experience or their access to knowledge, but we don't really know what works well. And we need to do research to validate our practice. So that's really important also for this partnership that will come into place. So I think my last point here is, in the time up to the EU elections and the other elections nationally, you will hear a lot of manifestos from different actors in the brain health space. And if you listen carefully, you will hear that we face a lot of the same challenges and we point to a lot of the same solutions. And that should speak for itself. We are pointing to important and the right solutions. So honestly, we should just start working. We should start work today to make brain health better for people in the future. Thank you for your attention. And then I hand over to my colleague over there.
Thank you very much. I follow, as we discussed yesterday evening, that I will join. My name is Peter Carey, and I'm very, very glad that I see, on one hand, familiar faces. We met before and we worked before together. We created many, many outstanding things already, and new faces. I'm glad again, because I need to. Good. I will try. So I think we created so many things last couple of years together, and it is fantastic to see. I'm president of Gamian Europe. What is Gamian Europe? Gamian Europe is a European patient organization what gives a house for all the organizations throughout Europe that are patient-centered. who says that I will try something out what is very patient-centered, maybe out of the box, but I will do something into this, I will put something into the system what is not usual. We have approximately 60 organizations connected to Gambian Europe. I think that's a big number, and we work hardly to understand all types of patients, what we can see, and all types of patients what we cannot see. And let me continue with something else. I was 40 when I was looking around, and I led a company. It was outstanding. It was great. As I look back, when I was a child, I dreamt of a life like that. I was absolutely satisfied. My mom, my loved one, everybody was proud. I was on TV even. Wow, it was fantastic. I was 43 when the voice started to talk to me. A very good friend's voice started to talk through the voice towards me. It was amazing. Fantastic, a nice voice, nice topic. You know, I was absolutely alone. It was the economic crisis around 2008. Everybody lost their job around me, and I was the boss. It was a bit hard to handle. So I think today everybody should know that in my life, I never thought that mental health can be anybody's problem. Till 43, I imagined that there is life without the topic mental health. But there is something, what is happening to you, and voice starts talking. I was lucky because the voice was nice. But you can imagine the situation when you lose your friends because you don't want to talk about your schizophrenia. You don't want to talk about your voices, the meanings, the situation of yours. I was lost. I spent years to hide my illness, myself. My family wanted me to hide my illness because if you are in the psychological, psychiatric system, you are lost, don't go there. I said, okay, I stay at home with my mom. I was 40, a man in 40s, from the capital to a village. It was a nightmare. So it can happen to anyone. We imagine that it cannot. Yesterday we had a very good discussion about this topic because Gambian Europe represents many, many mental health patients. But what kind of mental health patients we actually represent? Those ones whose voice is here with us. Those ones who can dress up like me today and speak like this. But 90 or 80, or I don't know in which country, how many %, they don't speak. They are hidden. They don't have voices. They are not visible. And it is, for me, it is a shame as president of Gambian Europe that I cannot know their voices. I can know their voices from Hungary only because I'm located in Budapest, Hungary, and I work for Awakenings Foundation. It is a community center when we give help for those ones who are really on the sides. And they do not have voices. So I do understand what is going on with them, why they are silent, what life events they could have before the illness, and what roots mental health can in real life be. And certainly it is not a fancy topic to talk about. Many, many bad life stories I heard, and I have my own one. So sometimes it is not fancy to talk about that. But I have to say that co-creation with organizations like EBC or European Psychiatric Association from Gambian Europe created a new way of looking at patients throughout Europe and throughout the globe, understanding the totally different patients. I think it is crucial today because we understand the patients from professional perspectives. That's great, outstanding, okay. We understand the organizations of patients. That's, again, very good. But we forgot understanding those ones who are really in trouble, who suffer, because we are afraid of their stories. We are afraid of our stories. You know, I sometimes say there's a blue Facebook where we put everything but is happy about us, but there is not a red one where we can put everything but is traumatizing, horrible, and shocking, because life is not only a Bobby house. Sorry to tell that. So thank you very much for ABC and all the other organizations who cooperate with Gambian Europe, because it is absolutely crucial and necessary to understand the roots of what is being a mental health patient and what is being a brain a brain in the society, because brain can be an organ, certainly, and can be looked at as an organ working like this and that, and I understand and I love it that way, okay? But our brain is working in the society with you and you and you, and I love it that way. And we should understand brains working that way too. So it is a privilege to be a part of European Brain Council and try to spoil a bit sometimes towards those directions. What is the message Gambian Europe and people with mental health problems can give for the future and for Europe? In 2019, we created a charter for Europe based on patients' inputs about schizophrenia. We found that the recovery rate and how they heal is absolutely different throughout Europe, country by country. And we were shocked how deep inequalities we saw. It was absolutely horrifying, and we created some points what every government, every care system should give to the patients, because we saw it was not given. However, local law, local rights were there, even if those were missing. So I think in the future, cooperation, horizontal knowledge sharing between professionals and patients would be crucial, and understanding the methods of this knowledge sharing, because it is important to include nearly everybody, and the way of this will be very, very challenging in the future, I think. And to avoid these inequalities, what we found with schizophrenia should not happen in the future with any other illnesses. So it cannot be possible that I call someone in Spain and she says that I'm very well with schizophrenia, I'm a bartender and I love it. And from another country I say that in my country I cannot have a job and I won't be paid. So I think we have very big things to do in the future, and I hope you will be together with us in the future too. Thank you very much.
Well, we are now going to start our first panel on addressing the burden and challenges of brain disorders. I think we had already a great insight and let's say a very sound basis in order to explore that further. And I'm pleased to introduce our first speakers, who actually are going to be a duet. And I'm introducing now Elena Alvarez-Barron from Angelini Pharma, as well as Elisa Milani from the European House Ambrosetti. So over to you.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for the invitation. I'm very pleased to be here today representing the private sector. And I'm also honored to be speaking after this patient's experience, because that's the reason why we are here today, to unite our voice to help people affected by brain disorders. And I have a couple of slides because I'm a visual person, and I always think we remember better when we see things. You can go to the next slide. So brain health is a global health priority. And a very good example of this is that we are here today. And it is and it should be a priority. But brain health can mean different things for different people. So I would like to start reading the definition of the World Health Organization about brain health. The previous slide, please. So good brain health is a state in which every individual can realize their own abilities and optimize their cognitive, emotional, psychological, and behavioral functioning to cope with life situations, which means it's not only about disease, but it's also about preventing disease. It's about being able to live our lives with our brain full potential, using our full potential in the brain. And this is a priority also for the Sustainable Development Goals. So if we look at the 2030 agenda, brain health is there. And why? Because when looking at the epidemiological data, reveals that actually brain health conditions are increasing day by day. So if you go to the next slide, we can see some numbers. 1 in 3 people will develop a neurological disorder in their lives. It's 1 in 3. So if we look here in our room, many of us will be or are already affected by neurological diseases. If we look at mental health diseases, they are affecting 1 billion people in the world, and 13% of the burden is already in adolescents. These are very impressive numbers that we need to consider. But when we look to the future, to the 2030, we can see that brain health disorders will be responsible for over 11 million deaths. If we look at disability, that represents 240 million years lived with disability. So again, this is the reason why we are here today, to put brain health on the top of the agenda. Next slide, please. And we are used to talk about neurological diseases and psychiatric diseases from different perspectives, but actually, it's important to know that they share common mechanisms. This is just one example where we look at the bidirectional relationship between depression and epilepsy. And as you can see there, if we look at patients with depression, the percentage of patients with depression that will develop epilepsy, it's higher than in the normal population. So there is this relationship that we can look at, looking at the prevalence of the diseases, but also at worse prognosis. We know that patients with a life depression that develop epilepsy have a higher likelihood to become drug resistant. If you go to the next slide, you will see vice versa. When we look at people with depression, you will see that there is a higher percentage of patients that will develop epilepsy. So it's important to know that comorbid mood disorders are among the strongest predictors, actually, for quality of life impairment, but also for suicidal ideation in patients with epilepsy. It's also actually associated with a higher frequency and severity of seizures. As I said, this is only an example. When we look at other neurological diseases, between 20 and 50% of the patients with stroke, multiple sclerosis, Alzheimer's disease, and Parkinson's disease will develop at some point depression. So these numbers are a reflection of the importance of our meeting today. If you go to the next slide, and it cannot be, that's only clinical data, but we also need to go further inside. We are talking about research and the importance of research and the importance of investing in research. We see here also there is genetic common mechanisms for neurological and psychiatric diseases. It's the case for many rare brain disorders. So it's really key that we further understand this overlap between neurological and psychiatric diseases in order to find new solutions for patients suffering from them. You go to the next slide. But research is not everything. So for sure, understanding brain disorders with these overlapping neurological and psychiatric phenotypes is key. And the importance is increasing, as you have seen by the numbers I saw in the first slides. We should unite our efforts to accelerate the understanding of these diseases to find therapeutic options. But as I said, this is not everything. We need to look at the social impact of these diseases. We need to look at policymakers. We need to unite scientists, public and private associations, patient groups, and scientists and policymakers to work together to really have this a priority. And funding and supporting the appropriate research is key. And I talk about research not only about scientific research. I talk also about research knowing what is happening in Europe, what are the differences in the different healthcare systems, and how we actually can unite. And as Peter was saying, we are able to deliver the same care to patients living in Spain, in Sweden, or in the Czech Republic. And for that, I would like to pass to Elisa, who will explain a little bit more about Headway, an initiative that we are working together to understand all these aspects.
Thank you very much, Elena. So Headway was an initiative which was launched in 2017 by the European Alzheimer's in partnership with Angelini Pharma. And it's actually a multidisciplinary platform for analysis, debate, discussion on what is the state of the art of the management of mental and then brain health across European countries. Next slide, please. So in the last, I would say, 5 years, 6 years, the importance of mental health has been increasingly acknowledged by European institutions, starting from the adoption of a comprehensive approach to mental health, which looks beyond public health policies and brings in other areas such as education, employment, urban planning, research, culture, environment, and climate. In terms of mental health outcomes, however, the situation remains quite challenging. Geopolitical conflicts, social tensions, the cost of living crisis has affected daily lives of millions of European citizens, with particularly pronounced effects on the most vulnerable ones. At the same time, we had an increase in extreme weather events, which has led to disruption of essential services and an increase in eco-anxiety, thus contributing to the rise of new mental health disorders and exacerbating the existing ones. Next slide, please. But throughout our lives, multiple individual social, structural determinants, individual determinants may combine to protect or undermine our mental health and shift our position of the mental health continuum. Obviously, exposure to unfavorable social, economic, geopolitical, and environmental circumstances increases the people's risks of experiencing mental health condition. In this scenario, since 4 years, we have been elaborating this index, which is called Mental Health Index, now in its 4th edition this year, which represents a useful tool for the monitoring and planning for healthcare, welfare, education, and environmental policies across Europe. As previously mentioned, obviously, in this moment, the adoption of data-driven tools for policymakers is an opportunity to actually see what is the actual state of the art, not only of the mental health status of the population, but also of the determinants of mental health, looking at environmental, individual, and socioeconomic factors, but also how European systems are responding to the needs of mental health of the situation, not only looking into healthcare, but looking at how mental health is managed in workplaces, in schools, and in society in general. Next slide, please. By providing an overview of mental health in Europe, based on a wide range of information collected, we consider 54 different KPIs across 4 different pillars, across all the 27 European countries plus UK. It can serve as a barometer for each country's ability to produce effective and comparable databases. In this sense, obviously, the index continues to represent and to highlight structural differences and limitations between different databases and health and social care systems. I tried to put into a single picture the entire report of this year and to give you a dynamic picture of how things have been changing in the last years. So you see the gray balls highlighted the previous edition, whereas the colored ones are this year's edition. And I tried to put an arrow to let you know how the countries have changed based on the interventions they did across the different areas we mentioned before. And it's quite interesting to see that obviously this is not to be an index of which countries are doing best and which countries are doing worse. This is not our idea. Our idea is to give a tool to policymakers, but not only to policymakers, but to patients' association, clinicians, scientific societies, and to see where they're doing best and where something else could be done, and to share the knowledge among different countries and see what good practices can be shared among these countries. Next slide, please. As mentioned, Headway was initially launched on mental health, but since two years, we've been launching it in partnership with Angelini Pharma on epilepsy. So we've started to put together workshops across different European countries and trying to see what is the management of epilepsy and what are the main areas of intervention needed, looking again across all of the different sectors. I won't go into the data, but you see that there is a lot to be done, not only looking at the capacity of healthcare systems to respond to the needs, but also in schools, in workplaces, and in society in general. So there are many things to be done, And these initiatives somehow can contribute to increasing the awareness. So next slide, please. So if you're interested, you can download the contents we elaborated by scanning this QR code, and obviously we're at your complete disposal in case you had any questions related to the work we do. Thank you very much again to European Brain Council for having invited us.
If I just may, Elisa, can you maybe say a word as to how the index is actually providing input to policy recommendations and policy change? Because that's obviously the topic of today. It will be the topic of discussion of the next panel. But as a way of introduction for their work, I mean, can you say something there that they would like to pick up on potentially?
Yes, so obviously we've been providing a picture for 3 years now. We're going to publish the 4th edition this year, putting together new KPIs. One of the main issues, as mentioned before, is the data availability. So if we don't have the ability to collect data and to see what is actually the state of the art of across European countries and to be able to compare these data, we don't have the big picture. It's different to have that big picture. So it is of crucial importance to try to improve. As we said, data protection is quite important, but we need more data to put everything together and to see where we need to work first in order to address where the needs are most needed, obviously. We'll be publishing the new edition this year in October, so hopefully it might be a useful tool for everyone to increase even more the state of the art and increase the knowledge and awareness of what is happening around member states.
Okay, awesome. Thank you very much. On our journey to the burden and the challenges of brain disorders, next topic is science and innovation. Mm-hmm. And we are privileged to have with us Morten Grunert, who is head of neuroscience at Lundbeck Pharma, to really go into the specific needs of the sector and maybe talking from your perspective about the experience from a pharmaceutical company and how to then foster innovation in the space. Morten, over to you.
Thank you, Fred. First of all, thanks to all of you organizers for inviting also our company to come here and talk about why we believe innovation is so important within brain health. As said, I represent the pharma industry. I also represent research. I don't represent the patient organizations, but my driver is exactly the same. I mean, my biggest driver, the reason I go to work every single morning is that I want to translate my scientific understanding to help patients. We have heard a lot about numbers. Just remember that behind every single one of these numbers, there is a person. There's a person that suffers. And I think we have, you can say, almost an ethical obligation to do everything we can with the competences we come with to help these patients. So this is my driver. This is why I go to work. That was just a starting statement. Basically, I represent this company called Lundbeck. We are a Danish-based company only focusing on developing drugs that can help patients suffering from any kind of brain disorders. We have been in the game for more than 70 years with this specific focus. This is the only thing we do. We work within, we call them biological clusters. So we work we try to understand, as was also mentioned previously, the brain or brain research is a relatively new area of research. The reason for that is due to the complexity of the brain. In all of your brains, you have around 100 billion different nerve cells that actually try to talk to each other and communicate all the time. It is extraordinarily complex to figure out how it works and also what's going wrong when things are not working properly. But this is what we do. We have divided our effort into 4 areas. So we work very much on trying to understand how does these nerve cells actually communicate to each other. That will tap into disorders such as within the psychiatric field. So schizophrenia, as we've heard about, depression, as we've heard about, anxiety. This is one of our research focus. Another focus is what we call neurodegeneration. So where part of your brain is actually missing. That could be disorders like Alzheimer's, as we have also been mentioned, and Parkinson. It could also be Huntington, as we have also heard about. Our third focus is within the headache space with specific focus on migraine. Here we have a good understanding about what's going on. And the fourth focus is what happens in your brain when you have an inflammation in the brain. what goes wrong, what kind of brain disorders would that lead up to, and how can we treat that. So this is how we work. You can say that it sounds very complex, it sounds almost impossible to do these things, but there's a lot of light it's not only at the end of the tunnel. I think a lot of the things, the new methodology that we have developed in Europe and the continuous focus we have on innovation is actually putting us on the forefront of this research. And I think that's also an ask for the politicians. We should do everything we can to keep the infrastructure to secure this continuous innovation and crosstalk across the European countries. I think I could come up with a long list of all the fancy stuff we can do, but just to mention a few, I mean, we also work with antibodies that we have to get into the brain. Your brain is protected. It will normally not allow a lot of things to go into the brain. That makes sense because you don't want the brain to be infected by viruses, bacteria. But when you develop drugs for the brain, you actually want sometimes to take advantage of antibodies and put them into the brain so they can do what they should do in there. Via a very focused innovation effort, we have now, you can say, small machinery, we call them shuttles, that can take an antibody and put it into the brain in the right area where it should be. And this is a major breakthrough in brain health that we can actually now also work along these lines. And we should, of course, continue doing stuff like that. Also, from an innovation perspective, I mean, we should secure that we are in Europe on the forefront of our AI abilities. We have used, now it's fancy and it's called AI, we have used machine learning for many, many years to actually help us in both designing the specific compounds we put into our drugs, but also to understand further the complexity of the brain. And everything we can do to actually get access to these methodologies would be very beneficial. So this is something about what we do, and then if I should then try to point to some gaps where we can all, in a united fashion, bring brain health forward, again, with the overall perspective of helping all these patients that we need to help. Then it's something that has actually been mentioned by all of you, but the sharing of the data is extraordinarily important. Of course, I completely realize that we have GDPR rules and we have to obey to those rules. But we are very often, as an industry, met by this, I would call it as a misinterpretation, that we are interested in figuring out what you or you use as an individual, your specific genetic profile, for example. For me, it's not that I'm not interested in you, but it doesn't matter for the work I do. Because the brain is so complex, we need, you can say, data from hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people to see specific patterns in how brain disorders develop. It's not of any value for us to go into a very specific individual and see hers or his genetic fingerprint is so and so, and then they should not get insurance or whatever. That is not of our interest. We need to see the broader picture, and thereby we can see patterns that we can then use to drive our focused innovation. This is what we need, and I think we should have that also from a politician standpoint. This balance between, of course, we should protect the individual, but we should still be able to see the holistic picture. That could really help us. As I said, we need this continued focus on fostering the right environment for innovation. Europe is super, super good in brain health and understanding basic brain science. Super, super good. We should do everything we can to protect that. That also goes for translational science. Here I think we can really, and by translational science I mean that what we do in what we call a preclinical space, so when we do research in the laboratories with cells and animals, we have to translate that into patients because it is patients we are here for. And again, it comes as no surprise, I guess, that you all have very unique brains. They are completely different from what you will find in other animal species. And the better we can put effort into getting the research understanding about how do you actually translate what happens in an animal to something that happens in a human being, then we have the right tools to also develop new medicine. So focus on that kind of research would be very, very important. And then just as a last thing, it is, and that's, I mean, almost a no-brainer, we should stay competitive within the EU community because, I mean, of course, we are in a global situation. We have strong competition from US and from Asia. Now we have touched upon the, you can say, that we should be able to provide medicine to all 27 members in the European community or in Europe in general, and I completely agree to that. But we should also be very careful from an intellectual property perspective that we're not putting too much boundaries on a European situation. Because, I mean, we love Europe. We are here. We have been here for 70 years. But, I mean, our innovation will simply flow to where we have the best infrastructure. If that happens in US, we do our innovation in US. If it happens in Asia, we do our innovation in Asia. So that balance, I think, is extraordinarily important. If we stop innovation in Europe, we might win in 1 or 2 years to come, but we are not here for 1 or 2 years. We're here for the next generations, many next generations. And to be really competitive on that matter, we also have to secure that, that innovation stays in Europe. And with that, I think I will hand over to the next speaker.
Thank you very much, Morten. And Morten, just a question, because you mentioned a couple of breakthroughs and light at the end of the tunnel, to use your words. Would you be able to identify what has changed in recent past, where our narrative was always, I would say, revolving around negativity in the sense that we were talking about the burden, the cost, the complexity of the brain, and the lack of disease-modifying treatments, if not therapies at all. So here, if you mention breakthroughs and you see like the entire innovation ecosystem in a positive light, what would you see has been a positive game changer, and what would need to be continued in that respect?
Yeah. I think then I will mention 3 things. The first one is this. I think we have gained a lot of new insight into translational research, as I called it. So actually, so that we can use, I mean, of course, we cannot do experiments on human beings as a starting point. We have to justify that from ethical perspective. That goes without saying. So I think we have been very good in trying to leverage our understanding about the differences between other animal species and human, how their brain works and our brain works. We use an approach called biomarkers so that we can actually see, even though a rat is different from us, there might be some of the same things in the body that change in a given situation, and we can use that to increase the chance that we get successful clinical studies. This is, of course, what we need to do. That's one thing. I think AI has brought in a lot of things. I think some of this negativity that we have around brain research is due to that it is, as you said yourself, extraordinarily complex. As I mentioned, you have 100 billion neurons. Each neuron can talk to 1,000 other neurons. The complexity, and that is just a snapshot. The complexity of that is almost religion. I mean, you almost cannot grasp the complexity of that. So I don't think, I think we have had this reductionistic approach that we wanted to understand a very, very small part of the brain and then expand from there. I think we have to go the other way around. We have to, and we have the opportunity for doing that with real-world evidence and also with the help of AI that accept that we don't, and we do that now, accept that we don't understand per se all the complexity, but if we are pointing in the right direction, then we can do the innovation to actually reveal this complexity. And I think we are moving in that direction. That gives me a lot of hope. Oh, I've always been very optimistic, but I think we actually get some tools now that can lift us even further.
No, thanks a lot for that positive spin. And I mean, I'm hoping it's providing the right introduction for our next speaker. We are pleased to have with us, I would say, a long-standing friend of EBC, neuroscientist herself, Catherine Berens from DG Research in the European Commission. Catherine is Deputy Head of Unit for in the People Directorate Combating Diseases. So, Catherine, over to you.
Thank you very much, Frederic, for the kind introduction. I must say that I am not a neuroscientist myself, but I would like to thank you very much for the invitation of EBC and also to thank our host, MEP Colm Markey, for hosting us today. And I will present you where we stand with brain research in Europe and give you some perspectives for the future. I think we have heard already quite a lot around the level of disabilities that brain disorders create for patients and the burden that it imposes on them, the families and society as a whole. So next slide, please. There is a real need for research and innovation in that area because it allows providing concrete solutions, so personalized therapies, new treatments for these disorders, but it also provides the evidence for better disease prevention and also health promotion. So it's not only about investing in how to deal with a disorder when it is there, but it is also about preventing them from appearing in the first place. So it's really important to maintain our health when, wherever possible. And then this evidence that would be, I think we are a little bit too far away in the slides. Yes. So it is also very important to provide the evidence for more general policy making. And I was very pleased to hear that it's not only in the field of health, but there are things to do also in other areas like employment at the workplace, in the schools, etc. So research is also there for such areas. There are a lot of challenges in the brain area, but these challenges, I think, and being also an optimistic like my neighbor, we should also take these as opportunities. So yes, the brain is a complex organ, which we try to understand at best. We need to work in collaboration with a number of stakeholders, which is not always easy, but let's join forces to do so. Yes, we absolutely need access to proper infrastructures where they exist and to make sure that they are known and used at best. Sustainability, we heard about, it's really an important aspect. We need to listen to the voice of patients and carers because they know what is best for them and they can really inform research from the very beginning, from the planning, the implementation, up to the uptake of results. So this is something that has been improved over the past years, I think, from when I look back, when I started long ago at the European Commission, but there is still much more to be done in that area. An important, very important aspect, and I think previous speakers also alluded to it before, is that it's not enough to have the research being performed, but we need to use these results to make them available where they matter. So be it at the level of the patients, we heard about inequality still happening in Europe, but also at the level of the policymakers to make sure that the evidence is used at best to develop these strategies and policies which would then very much help. And all that calls for a better structuring of the brain research area, and I will come back to that a little bit later. Next slide, please. So we have now the current framework program for research and innovation, Horizon Europe. I will not enter into all the details of it, just to say that it's much more impact-oriented than the previous framework program. So we really try to have a concrete impact for the patients, for the citizens and for society as a whole. It is developed a little bit differently compared to our previous framework programs and the work programs that we had in the past, in the sense that there is much more co-creation. And it could sound as a little bit of a buzzword, but I think it really matters because we do much more publicly consult about the priorities and the strategic orientations with the public, for instance, via the Research and Innovation Days. We also work hand in hand with the member states to identify the priorities for what matters at EU level, taking into account what is happening at national level. And we also very much work in cooperation with our colleagues from other EU services, because there we want to hear from them what is the evidence in research and innovation, the results that they would need for the development of their policies. So where do we have these gaps that need to be filled through research and innovation in order to develop these better policies? Next slide. I will zoom in a little bit more in the second pillar of Horizon Europe, which is where we do support collaborative research. And for brain research, of course, this is really very important, as without collaboration, we hardly get anywhere. So most of the previous Horizon 2020 framework program for research, a big chunks, 37% of the research funded in Horizon 2020 was through collaborative research. And in this pillar 2, we do also support partnerships. And a very important partnership which I wanted to mention is the Innovative Health Initiative, which is a partnership between the European Union and the life sciences industries, which aims at developing innovation, building on the integration of all the aspects from digital, medtech, and pharma and imaging. So this is really a partnership dedicated to health, which lends itself very well to the brain area, because all these aspects are very important. And indeed, there were already calls which have been issued, which are dedicated to the brain area. The second pillar is also supporting public partnerships, but I will come back to that a little bit later. Next slide, please. So here I have collected some topics which have been published previously, so call for proposals, where we ask the scientific community together with their partners to provide us with proposals on given research topics, which are then proposals which are then evaluated and selected for funding for projects in a given area. I will not enter into the details of all of these. They are all very relevant to brain health. Two main messages here. The topics are extremely broad, and they can address really a very broad coverage, in a very broad coverage, the whole value chain of brain research. So it starts with rather basic research on understanding the pathophysiology of disorders, preclinical research, and also clinical research, and then also care. So I think there are really opportunities, a lot of opportunities for brain research. And my second message is, do not search, when you have the work program in your hands, do not search only for brain-relevant keywords, because you could well have topics which are extremely relevant where you don't see the word brain, or neurological, or neurodegenerative. I take, for instance, the last topic which is mentioned on this slide, which is about artificial intelligence tools to predict the risk of chronic non-communicable diseases and or their progression. So that is indeed extremely relevant, but you will need to dig a little bit and analyze a little bit the work program to see where the entry doors for brain research are. Next slide. Just a snapshot of two projects which I think are very interesting and which really delivered concretely something. The first one is the Upright project, which is a project that developed school-based interventions in order to enhance the resilience capacities in teenagers. And this project developed different modules. 3 modules were were targeting the teenagers themselves and their teachers. The first one to develop effective coping skills, a second one about developing emotional resilience, and the third one about mindfulness. And then also a component which was dedicated to the parents and positive parenting skills. And all these modules are freely available on a web platform. And also they have been included, the interventions, in a master program in Denmark. So I think this shows that we have results, and we would like to see more of these put really at the disposal of the community, the patients, but also the citizens, so that they serve their purpose. Another example, next slide please, is the EPND project, so the European Platform for Neurodegenerative Diseases, which is an innovative medicines initiative project, which has recently discovered 5 different subtypes of Alzheimer's diseases. They analyzed the database with the data that they had collected in order to do so. And these 5 subtypes actually show different progression rates from one type to the other. And this could serve as the basis for targeted personalized therapies in the future. So there as well, I mean, digging, we heard about the importance of collecting and sharing data, and this shows indeed that with analyzing a sufficient number of this data, you can find interesting differences that you can then further investigate and build upon. Next slide. So what next for the future? We heard already about the partnership. So on this slide, you will see it mentioned and as a flagship initiative. And it comes from the fact that we have been supporting a number of initiatives already in the past in order to structure the brain research area together with member states. And in there, I can mention, for instance, the joint program on neurodegenerative disorders, the Neuron initiative, which is more focusing on neurological diseases and also on mental health. Of course, the Human Brain Project and the e-brain infrastructure for modeling the brain. And together with the member states, we thought that we have come to a point where time is really ripe now to go to the next level and bring these initiatives together in order to make further economies of scales. And because we see that they have developed similar types of infrastructures and processes and could benefit of being brought together under the same umbrella in order to further strengthen the European brain area and boost European competitiveness in that field. And also with a view to create a real concrete ecosystem for brain research from the very early stages up to the very late stages, and indeed to reach out to the people who need it. So the ideal vehicle for that vision to materialize would be a European partnership on brain health and including mental health. Next slide, please. Here, I would like to avoid a certain panic when you see the question mark. And the question mark is added just because we don't have a formally adopted strategic plan yet. So the future brain health partnership has not yet materialized, but I can assure you that indeed we will go forward with it. There are a number of expected partners to be working together in that future endeavor. Patient organizations, policymakers, the researchers, of course, clinicians, regulators, industry, citizens, and the healthcare providers. It will be implemented as a co-funded partnership, so there the European Commission also will contribute financially with over than 100 million euro expected as such a contribution, and it should last for 7 to 10 years. Next slide, please. So for preparing the way to the partnership, which is expected to kickstart its activities in early 26, there is a coordination and support action which is currently ongoing and which is tasked with developing a strategic research and innovation agenda, the implementation mode for the partnership to operate, and also its governance. A proposal for the partnership is currently being developed. And I think a most important message for you in the audience is that there will be public consultation around the strategic research and innovation agenda. And I would very much encourage everybody to contribute and put forward their comments, see whether there are gaps, and also identify priorities there. How to keep yourself informed. Next slide. Here I have put a few links where you can find more information, notably when it comes to info days that we organize very regularly. All the calls are published on our funding and tender portal, and if you need help to apply, you're very much encouraged to reach out to your national contact points. Next slide. And I would certainly like to finish by mentioning that in exactly 2 weeks, on the 21st of March, we will have interesting sessions around mental health at the Research and Innovation Days. They will be web streamed, so everybody can attend and also take part. These 3 sessions will address from different angles mental health. The first one is rather general, so we will have a reflection there regarding the place of research and innovation in order to feed into mental health policies for improve mental health in Europe. Then there is another one regarding the quality of life of young cancer survivors, with one of the aspects to be considered being mental health, and the third one focusing on the power of art and culture for people's well-being. So with that, many, many thanks, and really happy to be here and to share with you and to exchange with you.
Many thanks, Catherine, and thank you for alleviating our anxiety about that question mark. More seriously, there were discussions last night with our hosts as to what was the threshold and the objective in terms of making a realistic partnership, let's say, possible and putting it on its track. And basically, and very concretely, how much are we asking from the member states?
Well, these are still discussions which need to happen. Internally at the level of the European Commission, we had a look at what was spent over the years, the previous years, and we thought that it would make sense in order to boost competitiveness of the European Union in that area to add a little bit of funding there. I guess we are speaking only about funding, and we came to the conclusion that between 100 million, 150 million from the Commission would be appropriate. Now you know that co-funded partnerships, we aim at also pooling with resources from the member states, and there are two aspects, two models. One is about co-funding calls for proposals, and there the Commission then covers 30% of the cost. So with the 100 to 150 million, that would be around 30% of the cost. But I think we are past that stage, because this is really something that has been ongoing very well for several years in a number of initiatives. So I think that we need to invest more in integrative activities, be it as I mentioned already, providing access to infrastructures, or to have this capacity building that is absolutely needed at European level. And for these integrative type of activities, the European Commission then considers co-funded partnership at the level of 50%. So that would mean that the budget allocated by the European Commission is then matched by the budget, an equal budget from the member states. But of course, it will all depend of what the member states would like to do. So I can only but encourage everybody to reach out to their representatives and make sure that the message is passed, that there are real needs, and that this needs to be really addressed in a serious way. But I'm rather confident because I must say that all the discussions that we have had with the member states, it was really very straightforward that there was a need and that they would support such a partnership. So I'm rather confident that they will indeed commit, including financially.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Catherine. And I'd like to ask you to join me in thanking our panelists, as we will have a swap, and I'd like to invite our next panel to come on stage. So thank you very much for your contribution. And I'd like to invite Kevin Rostasi, Martin Kass, Livia De Pica, Thomas Ryan, and Mike Green to join me on stage for our continued discussion. And actually, as we just heard from Catherine, a lot of discussion will need to be had on the strategic orientations on how to prioritize brain research and brain health in the future partnership. And we were planning this panel to receive the views of the member societies of EBC towards the EU elections, but I would say also in an approach that is really craved around the life course philosophy and brain health across life course, but also this notion as to how brain health integrates in society. That's something that we heard from previous speakers. And I'll probably also tease our panelists today around the concept of how we can understand the brain as our best capital, or capital in which we would need to invest. That's probably in line also with the notion of how we can maintain our cognitive reserve across the years, and also potentially how we can see brain no longer as brain health, but also as brain wealth for society. So these are elements of reflections that I would like to throw to you, maybe receiving your views and then opening up the discussion and looking forward to hear from you. Obviously, live starting with early days and childhood. I'd like to bring the president of our European Pediatric Neurology Society on stage to provide his perspective first. So Kevin, over to you.
Yep, thank you very much, and thanks for starting with the youngest one on the panel. Brain health doesn't start in adulthood. We have to think completely different. Brain health starts even before pregnancy, I would say. You need to have healthy parents who then educate their children in a thoughtful and holistic environment. And I think that's probably one of the most important points that the EU thinks about, that brain health starts very early. Because in the long term, this is your capital you have. And I see it on a daily basis that many children are not supported well and will end up with a much lower expectation than they could achieve. Now, on another note, I mean, I'm working now for the last 30 years, and I have seen tremendous development in the last 15 years in the field of pediatric neurology, which were unimaginable 15, 20 years ago, thanks to many people from pharma, from different organizations, from patients' organizations, in the field of epilepsy, for example, or in the field of MS. I do not see a single child that goes to the adults with a handicap when they transfer to the adults. 20 years ago, many children would be affected very severely with an EDSS score of 4 and 5. This is not happening. So we have developed many nice tools to improve the health of these children. On the other hand, we see the rise of new diseases or old diseases such as attention deficits, such as autism. These are real big challenges. And I can only stress that the European Union tries to do this on a big level. That's food intake, schooling, supportive environment. Was very interesting to hear about this EU-driven community approach on improving depression and other diseases. I think this is a very strong tool where the new media can also be used. Now, on a practical terms, our society, which consists of about 2,500 members in all 27 European states, plus 17 neighboring countries who all want to join the European Union in the long term. We have national representatives that try to implement on the national level these so-called national brain plans based on the IGAP in the Intersectoral Global Action Plan on Neurological Diseases. So this is an important tool our society contributes in a part to education on many different levels. This is my statement, and take on the children.
Thank you very much, Kevin. And I'm pretty certain we'll build on a few of the points that you were giving us. I'd like to move on to my neighbor, Martin Kaas, who is the president of the European College of Neuropsychopharmacology. Martin, you've got the floor.
Thank you very much, Fred, and thanks for this event, and thank you for hosting this. It's a very important meeting, I think. As the president of the European College, I would like to say to you that we are representing neuroscience applied research in Europe. So each year we have a very large congress where almost 6,000 people show up, where people from industry, science, clinicians, regulators, patients come together and discuss the current front lines of the field. And I think what we see appearing now is that time has come to bring the right treatment to the right patient and, as said earlier, at the right moment in time. And what this requires is really a fundamental understanding of the brain in health and disease. So I think we do nice investment currently in brain research, but I think there are many, many projects, excellent projects, not being funded, meaning that we have a lot of excellent science in Europe, but only limited funded to move the field forward. So really, I would really like to prioritize brain research and innovation, make that a European priority, and dedicate significant funding to this to make it all happen. I think we're currently in the position to put forward novel digital technologies as well as measures of brain functioning together to actually try to identify when, how, and what to measure in these patients. So at what time do we need to measure what, and how can we actually connect this to specific diagnostic boundaries. I think time has also come to start thinking about our current diagnostic framework and maybe try to allow neuroscience innovation to go there and maybe take into account the clinical heterogeneity that is there. So for example, one individual with autism is not the same as the other individual with autism. We have to make clear what the differences are and may have personalized treatment for these individuals. Also, there is some transdiagnostic overlap, which was already indicated earlier, that we have to consider, and also our regulatory approvals for novel endpoints and treatments need to go beyond these diagnostic boundaries. Finally, I think we need to understand that if innovation in science is progressing so nicely, we should also adapt that in our healthcare system. So we need to loosen up the boundaries and actually to make that happen. So again, I think time has come to bring the right treatment to the right patient and at the right moment in time. And I'm looking forward to the further discussions here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin. You came up with actually quite a handful. Let's move on to other panelists, and I'll come back to you because there are certainly a couple of points that deserve a solution rather than saying, okay, it's not fit for purpose, but let's advance that. But let's move on to you, Olivia. You're coming on behalf of the European Psychiatric Association. So over to you for your statement.
Yes, first of all, thank you very much to the European Brain Council for the invitation. I'm representing the main association representing psychiatry in Europe. And so it's been wonderful seeing throughout the different talks where we've been speaking about brain health this morning that there were many mentions of mental health also throughout the presentations, even if sometimes it was with an asterisk or in parentheses. Mental disorders make up 2/3 of the burden of all brain health disorders, and actually the majority of the costs related to them, especially indirect costs. So it's a bit strange, of course, that we still need to specifically mention that when we talk about brain health, that also includes mental disorders. But it's not always been the case. So I think this is an evolution that I very much applaud, and I hope that we can keep going in this direction of seeing brain health as encompassing both neurological and psychiatric disorders. So it becomes clear to everyone that there is no health without brain health and no brain health without mental health, because healthy brains can only foster resilient minds if both aspects are taken into account. We've heard also this morning how the brain is the most complex organ that we have in our bodies. And then, and this is my specialty, the translation of brain to mind is even more complex still. So given the huge complexity that we are facing, we really cannot afford to compete against each other. We really need to collaborate between neurologists, psychiatrists, neuroscientists, psychologists, other allied specialties to solve the challenges that we are facing. And listening to the talks this morning, I've outlined a few priorities that I think are my core message. So for brain health to include mental health, and for research into brain health and mental health to be, first of all, personalized, and this is seconding Martin Kasse's message, the right treatment for the right patient. It's so clear to all of the clinicians working in the mental health field that there is no such thing as depression. There are, in fact, many depressions, many different types of depression. And sticking to the outdated framework, diagnostic framework of one DSM category of depression is not benefiting us, is not benefiting the patients any longer. So let's move towards a new diagnostic framework and a more personalized treatment that steps away from rigid protocols and instead looks at the right treatment at the right time for the right person. Secondly, a bigger focus on prevention. And here I'm seconding the message of brain health doesn't start in adulthood. We know that the biggest preventable cause, the number one preventable cause of all mental disorders is childhood adversity. So also here, I think the science of prevention of mental disorders is a very young science, and it's only in the most recent years that there has been more support and funding available for this important area of research. And we need to invest a lot more in this moving forward. And then finally, the translation of science to policy, because there is no use to good science if we can't use it for the benefit of our society and our citizens. And here the EPA has outlined a few priorities which I think are worth mentioning. First of all, harmonization of mental health care delivery. We've heard Peter this morning talk about the huge disparities in treatments, in experiences of patients with mental health conditions throughout Europe, and this is really unacceptable. So in order for the science to be implemented, we also need to make sure that there is a level playing field, and patients with mental health conditions throughout Europe can all expect high quality care. Then secondly, also in order to implement the science, we need to have well-functioning healthcare systems that are capable of attracting, training and maintaining adequately skilled mental health staff. And this has been a huge challenge in the last few years. Thirdly, we need to promote ethical standards of mental health care delivery also across Europe. And I think this is exceptionally important to reduce also the discrimination and the stigma and the negative consequences that many patients face. And all of these things together will help us to answer the challenges of the changing world in front of us. Because we've just dealt with COVID, but psychiatrists and other mental health professionals, we already know what's coming towards us, and we know that we need to invest in this as a priority in order to face these challenges. Migration, climate change, an aging population, AI and digitalization, all of this will have a big impact on the mental health of our societies. So it's crucially important that Europe makes brain health and mental health a top priority in all of its policies. So adequate resources are allocated to research and implementation. And I think it's definitely worth investing into that because, well, it's our biggest asset, the brain capital. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Livia, and thanks for emphasizing the need for a united front, particularly as we have the ear of policymakers today. And would like to move on to our next panelist, Thomas Ryan, on behalf of the Federation of European Neuroscience Societies. Thomas, you have the floor.
Well, I'd like to start by thanking the European Brain Council and Colm Markey for hosting this event. I'm speaking on behalf of the Federation of European Neuroscience Societies, which represents 22,000 basic neuroscientists working in 33 European countries. I'm a neuroscientist myself. That's just another way of saying I don't understand how the brain works. I can explain how heart attacks happen, I can explain diabetes, even though it's not my specialty, but I can't really explain what's going wrong in schizophrenia, depression, or in autism. And the reason for this is that we don't yet have a core fundamental understanding about how the brain works. And this is why we need to invest so much in basic research over the coming period. Now, the concern that our organization has is that we're simply not investing enough in basic research, particularly in Europe, and particularly when we're considering brain health and brain disease. And we know what success looks like. Most of the recent successes in neuroscience has come from the USA. And the USA spends about 12 billion tax dollars per year through the NIH on neuroscience research, on brain research. And that doesn't include what it spends through the NSF, through defense spending, and through obviously significant philanthropy. That's 12 billion tax dollars per year. In contrast, Europe is spending about 500 million euro per year. Okay. The other thing to remember about or to be aware of with respect to American brain research spending is that it accounts for over 1/3 of the entire US National Institute of Health. So the US is prioritizing 1/3 of its health research on the brain. And if we are to be competitive in this ecosystem, we need to be looking at that model and taking the scale, not necessarily the structure, but taking the scale of US funding and seeing how we would be competitive in the European ecosystem. The reason why we need to be concerned is we have 150 million Europeans who are suffering from some form of brain or mental health disorder, and this is increasing because of what we're learning about how long COVID has been affecting the brain. And I would say that our greatest opportunity in Europe is our brain capital, specifically with respect to our young people. So neuroscience has been changing quite rapidly over the past 10 to 15 years. The reason is we now have new tools for understanding the brain that we didn't have 10 or 20 years ago. And those of us who work in Europe, who've set up our research programs in Europe, have found that the environment allows us to be quite free in the questions we pursue, allows us to be iconoclastic, allows us to be quite daring in our research questions. But at the same time, we're frustrated by the lack of funding relative to our American peers. And indeed, half of my own research students at Trinity College Dublin in Ireland will be moving to the USA next year for their postdoctoral careers. And in general, we're not doing enough to attract these Europeans back from America into Europe. The last thing I would say is that while brain health is extremely important, we need to look at brain health and brain capital more broadly. And that doesn't just mean understanding health and disease, it means understanding brain development, particularly child brain development, where much of the positive health outcomes that we can imagine will originate. And also more broadly with respect to how understanding the brain will affect AI in the coming decades. And neuro-inspired AI will certainly be a principal priority for researchers throughout the world and will be necessary for the next generation of artificial intelligence. So I would just close with saying that I do believe truly that this century is going to be the century of the brain. And it's up to us to decide whether we want that to happen in Europe or not. There is no brain health without brain understanding, and therefore we can't have investment without investigation into how the brain works.
Thank you very much. And again, a handful to pick up on, but actually the century is already, diminished by a quarter, so we better hurry up in making it a priority. So, but actually the partnership was just announced for next year, so we will just be at 2025. But thanks for these compelling statements. We'll come back to that. I'd like to finish by inviting our last panelist, Mike Green, and then invite our panelists to comment on potential solutions. So, Mike, you've got the floor.
Okay. Only one mic's working. Hope everyone can hear me. Yeah? Okay. So I'm Michael Creans, the Deputy Executive Director of the European Academy of Neurology. So we represent about 45,000 members across 47 countries. Similar to some of others here, we get about 6,000 delegates to our Congress each year. And I'm very pleased to be here. And EAN is as representing EAN, a founding member of EBC, to mention. And then contrary to Professor de Picker saying she was sort of surprised to see mental health as an asterisk to brain health, I was surprised to see that it wasn't neurology as an asterisk to brain health. And then going through the day, in terms of one of the policy asks was and it's something that's in the EBC manifesto as well, is about generating data to inform policy. And I can see that here today as well, because some of what you were mentioning, our studies that we cite are saying 1 in 3 will have a neurological disorder in their lifetime. You see things from the Commission where it's a little bit lower, or it's combined in total across brain condition, mental health and neurology into brain conditions. So that's something we would like to work on and improve going forward in the future, that there's combined or uniform methodologies within the brain community, so that we can all speak more or less with the same voice, which would be very important for us. Also, very interesting to hear a bit more about the upcoming Brain Health Partnership, which we will be vigorously informing about the gaps that clinicians see in research, as we've done our own research agenda recently, which was motivated by some of the input and some of the work that we saw with EBRA. So we're looking forward to having the chance through EBC to build on that as well. I think, was it $500 million a year is great. Was it 30, 40-fold increase over the last 10 years? So we look forward to doing even better there. And then something else that's very important to us, which might diverge a little bit, is public awareness. And what Professor Rostasi was mentioning earlier about the importance of childhood. So we have our brain health mission, our collaborative on awareness, and one of the first things that we're starting there is reaching out at a young age. So we have a school challenge for younger kids for them to explain and to learn about the importance of caring for their brain health from an early age. So we're talking in primary schools. And I'm pretty happy that I think next week we will have the first award ceremony for some primary school classes in Vienna. And this sort of supports and what we're doing in terms of advocating and trying to influence policy going forward. It's me, short.
Thanks a lot, Mike. Actually, I'd like to use the time we've got available to try and focus on some of the solutions, because you each came up with a variety of different challenges, and whilst the title of our panel was Policy Asks, so I'd like to come back to each and every one of you to say, if you had like a magic wand or one wish, you know, with the genius of out of a bottle, what would you ask to policymakers, thinking that the sky is the limit? You know, it's like in June they need to be re-elected, so now they can promise anything. We'll hold them accountable afterwards.
It's not long enough already.
Well, actually, the issue is, how do we address the complexity? So we should probably take it bit by bit, but if there was one issue you'd like to single out, each and every one of you. Kevin, I'll start with you again.
Yeah, on a practical agenda, I would love to see that in every country the national brain health plan incorporates a pediatric neurologist who is at the forefront deciding what's good for the brain in the first 18 years. I see this plant growing. For example, in Germany or in Switzerland, there are many young pediatric neurologists on board of this agenda, because we need to translate our good ideas onto a national level and practical terms. This would be, if I could have money, I would put it on this person.
Okay, thank you. Martin, your magic wand moment?
Okay. Indeed, there are many, as I said earlier, but I think if we would like to capitalize on very smart scientists that we actually have in Europe, we have industry who's willing to invest in this very important topic. I think we have many, many patients who are in need. I think we should be able to invest in that sufficiently to get them work together and to bring the right treatment to the right patient, I would say.
Yes, but what does that require? So it's like maintain investments. We heard from Thomas.
Yes.
It's like we've got a target of 12 billion. So, okay, the sky is the limit, or 12 billion is the limit. So what does it need in order to maintain that investment, according to you? I know it's not one single answer, but
right.
You can give a few pointers if you like.
Well, money is a good start for sure, and I think if we met up with the US investment, considering the proportion of illness, I think that would be a fair comparison.
Mm-hmm. But does that, according to you, match what Suzanne was saying in terms of making sure that the investment is commensurate to the burden of disease?
Yeah, well, it's the burden of disease, but of course also the prevention of disease. Mm-hmm. But both will need a very much fundamental understanding of the brain, requiring interdisciplinary research between preclinical, clinical investigators.
Awesome. So we seem to have this common understanding now. Livia, could you add to the fruit salad?
I like to think big, so of course. I'm a clinician and a researcher, so if you ask me what is my one wish, I could come up with lots of things, more funding, more research projects, etc. But I'm going to do something different. My one magic wish would be that every MEP that sits in the new parliament after the election somehow magically has a little voice that they hear in their heads. That every discussion, every decision tells them, what about patients with brain disorders? What about patients with mental disorders? How are they affected by what we are discussing here today? Mm-hmm. Because we've seen, and it's been so clear during the COVID, we've published on that, I've got all the proof, that if we do not place these patients front and center, they will be forgotten. Mm-hmm. Not because we have bad intentions, but simply because, in many cases, severe brain disorders, severe mental disorders are not sexy. There are not enough ice bucket challenges and TikTok dances and all of that to put the awareness where it should be. And especially for some of those most severely affected patient groups, they're not even sitting at the table or allowed in the room. In many cases, they're completely invisible, their voices are not heard. So we need other people to advocate for them, and who better than the people who sit in the parliament.
It speaks million words, actually, what you are just saying. I would probably add to this also the fact that this would be a long-term vision, because we shared quite a frustration to see announcement around the European Health Union, around the comprehensive approach to mental health, about the healthier together, like including neurological disorders, but still very little being done. So there is this degree of frustration not to see a kind of long-term vision and strategic ambition towards brain disorders. That's definitely something, and hopefully with the help of our host today, that in the new mandate we can see changed. Thomas, back to you. Your magic wand, apart from adding zeros on the check on brain research, what would it be?
I think apart from the scale of funding, we need to look very carefully at the structures with which we allocate funding. One feature we need to be concerned with is researcher independence, and we're linked to that selecting for excellence. And while the European Research Council, the ERC, obviously needs to be ring-fenced and be autonomous, I strongly believe that research funding for brain health and brain research, and indeed other aspects of European research funding, could benefit from a similar investigator-driven model, which minimizes the bureaucracy and allows researchers to simply write excellent proposals, and that the best ones are then funded. Because my concern is when we focus too much on top-down focus on particular diseases, that we don't necessarily get the most impactful science.
A question back to you, Thomas, because you emphasized the comparison with the NIH earlier. Obviously, the picture in the landscape in Europe is completely different in the sense that we would have rather a more important national investment into science than in the US compared to the state level. And they would have a federal system that is, let's say, benefiting from a higher budget. So we cannot really find comparability there, or it's at least the response we very often get from the European Commission when we raise that argument. But where do you see then the shift and the balance? If you compare, you mentioned the experience you had at Trinity College in Dublin. Where do you see your relationship with the national agency back in Ireland, but also what your colleague experienced back in their countries dealing with their own governmental institutions?
Well, first, it's true when we're comparing 500 million to 12 billion. We're talking about federal budgets. And of course, we have to include national budgets here too, which aren't included in that figure. But equally so in the US, individual universities have significant capital from philanthropy, from their own business model of higher education and so on. And this also feeds directly into research, so that would have to be accounted for too. But to answer your broader question, I think that the reality is we are performing extremely well in European brain research relative to the investment, even when you take into account individual countries. I mean, if you were to do it based on per tax dollar or per tax euro, any back of the envelope analysis would suggest that we're making the most of our resources. And the advantages that we have here are a situation where people can really be very innovative if they get the resources to do so, and can be less conservative, particularly in earlier parts of their career, than they may need to be in the American system. I also think that the fact that we have so many different cultural interactions promotes different ways of approaching science, but it's harder to provide hard data for that. But my experience is working in Europe. That's one of the assets that we have. What I think would be wonderful, though, maybe this is too ambitious, would be to have a physical center of European research. That doesn't exist currently. So the NIH in the US has the National Institute of Health physical campus outside of Washington, D.C., and a great amount of research happens there, as well as funding research across the USA. And nothing exists like that at a European level. But we have a model. The model would be Germany, because the Max Planck Society does something quite like that. And I think if we're going to take research seriously, at a European level, we'll eventually have to move towards having some kind of a European Max Planck society that would be based in physical institutions, that would be co-funded by member states. And I think that type of interaction would lead to sustainable outcomes rather than just, small individual grants.
So you would recognize that as a key element or key building block of the ecosystem we are calling for? Just would like to emphasize that in the context of a declaration of the Belgian Prime Minister very recently, who is the President of the Council of the EU, who declared we need a EU NASDAQ in order to foster private investment into biotechs, into life science in Europe. And that would certainly contribute to a surge in funding. Would you agree with that? Or would you see that's a complement to, let's say, those different building blocks in the ecosystem?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So, Colm, it's one to add to the list. Mike, I'd like to finish off with your wish and your magic one trick.
Well, if the sky is the limit, it's that everyone understands some basics of how to care for their brain health throughout their whole life course, mental and neurological alike. But in the meantime, I'd settle for some European level. I'm pressing you, but it doesn't seem to be working. It's not like
yeah, it's knocked them off.
It's gone as well.
Been
cut off. There we go. But so in the meantime, we would settle for some European level coordination of national brain plans and some funding there for that as well. Because since IGAP came along, we find that they're slowly cropping up here and there in different countries and a little bit disconnected in some cases. And as was pointed out earlier as well, that in some cases it's a different set of professionals that are involved. So some uniformity there and some exchange on best practice, would be good.
All right. So with that, I'd like to hand over to our host and our co-chair. You've got an handful to conclude on, and good luck.
Do you want to say first? No, you can.
Thank you very much. I don't know whether I should go first or last, but I'm happy to go first. No, it's been really interesting. I'm delighted I was here to stay through it all. I suggest I could have left earlier, but I was more than happy to stay. Just a few observations very quickly. Look, there's so much. It's hard to cover it all, but I think where someone at the start opened up with the human factor, and I suppose I mentioned my own family scenario with my own brother and mother and various things. Like, we shouldn't lose sight of the important human factor in this and the human capital that is lost through the lack of ability to act, I suppose. And I think that's the first thing that comes to mind. And I think it's important to the whole and within the whole mental health, particularly the whole stigma scenario, where I think we don't do enough to recognise that people shouldn't feel that they're somewhere been I won't say discriminated, but somewhere put one side because are not willing to come forward, perhaps more importantly, in terms of any sort of mental health issues they have, or indeed on the other side as well. But second to that, I think the whole area of the idea of this is a young science, and I suppose in a lot of ways it's a young science because it's only in recent times we had the technologies to analyse the brain in many ways. And I think it's important that we take advantage of that. And the second point to me is regards that, and I think come up a couple of times, the whole concept of we talk about big data and the ability to capture information and data and make the most of it. Obviously the GDPR side of it comes in, but I don't think GDPR is going to stand in the way of anonymised data. I would imagine is very useful in terms of the research that has to be done. So I think those sort of bridges should be relatively easy to cross. But I think the potential of the technologies and the big data to make a real difference, I think, is important. The one that struck me as much as anything was the competitiveness piece. If the Americans are spending $12 billion, and this comes up constantly in Europe in terms of are we being left behind in terms of investment in different research and different capacities. You see what's invested elsewhere, albeit that national governments do put more in alongside that 500 million. I think we have to be careful in so many ways, both through investment and through our regulatory framework, that we don't leave Europe in a position where it's not in a position to compete, even pitching for funding or different scenario, or even how we roll out, let's say, new medicines, and that is, I think we're behind the curve in some of those things. So I think that's another area that's very important. The lifelong piece that was touched on at the end, and touched on by yourself. We were talking last night. I have a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old. What should I be doing for their mental health like? And it does start at the young age, and it does start about living your own journey as regards the mental health piece, anyway. But I suppose in the end of it, from my perspective, the asks, the long list of asks for the next term, I think it is very important. I'd be curious from the lady from the Commission in terms of, you talked about the partnership. There was talk here about an intergroup in the Parliament, and perhaps even I hear meetings in the background about a health committee in the Parliament. Where would it, maybe afterwards, but where that would sit in terms of the cooperation and coordination of those different initiatives? Because it's something, certainly, from my perspective, I'd be more than happy to push. I think the broader sense of this, and I think many people push mental health, and many people push, if you like, the brain disorders, but to bring the whole lot together as one and make it such a big area as it is, and they are so intertwined, I think is something that probably isn't done enough. I think they're seen as two separate scenarios, and I think we need to do more to bring them together. And if you like, it makes it a bigger agenda as well, or a bigger agenda item. So I think that would be very important from my perspective. But overall, I'll take on board. I think one last thing I'll say is someone made reference to, well, there's 705 MEPs, and if 10 billion brain cells can talk to each other, surely we can get 705 MEPs to talk to each other. So we might need some brain health expertise to get the European Parliament to think in the same way as the brain does. But no, look, delighted to be here, genuinely interested in a lot of those issues. Would be more than happy to champion a case in terms of making this relevant. I think the next mandate of the Parliament is where this is at, and indeed tying that in with the partnership that's been talked about from the Commission side. That's what we can, that is where we are now, and that's where we can make a difference. So I think that's what's important from my side. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Colm, for your words. Like you, I've been scribbling down some notes from today's meeting, and I think we've heard some extremely powerful messages today. We've heard from all our diverse communities who can work together to improve brain health for citizens. I think I would like to emphasise, from my perspective, the message of hope, that we need to, of course, explain the burden of disease, and it's not one disease. I think I once heard there are over 400 brain diseases, and some are obviously more common than others, but we have a very great challenge ahead of us, but breakthroughs are happening all the time. This is what excites me as a researcher. When you pick up the latest journal and you find, wow, they're really making excellent progress. Things are really happening in this space. But for this, of course, the advances are not happening fast enough. We need to accelerate the research processes, and in ways that really can bring benefit faster to the patient, to communities and society. So I quite like our title, of course, No Health Without Brain Health. We've heard some editing today, so it's no health without brain health, without mental health, without neurology, and without improved understanding. And for all this, we need more resources. And I could probably add, we need, of course, policy engagement. I think we've had a very great meeting today. Thank you to all of the panelists, and to Colm for hosting this event. And thank you for your participation. And I would like to end with just the message that I started with today, because I want to remind you of our EBC's manifesto, where we're really calling for a European Parliament's intergroup on brain health and brain research. and an EU action plan or joint action on brain health and brain disorders. So with that, I would like to bring the meeting to a close and thank everybody once again. Thank you very much.